Hello, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're joining from.
I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this. I know we did we had our conversation. That could have almost been the conversation we're going to have today.
We could have just recorded that, right? So I know, Amisha, you're at Tipalti now. Anything new and exciting on the horizon for Tipalti?
I'm so glad you asked. So Tipalti is a finance technology company. We do finance operations solutions like global payments and AP and PO management for high growth companies like Noom, Roblox, Twitch, Twitter, and healthcare companies and software and tech. So mostly all high growth companies, right, that are looking to grow and get enterprise capable finance capabilities. And so we have a conference coming up, Illuminate, on September 15th here locally in San Francisco and also virtually. So if you're interested in finance, tell your finance teams to attend. We make finance easy across the entire company. It's easy to use. I was telling Kristen yesterday, I approve actually invoices from my team through Slack. So
that's really awesome. I went back to my finance team after you told me that to let them know, hey guys, Slack, let's get on this.
okay.
So I'll be sure to remind our listeners at the end about the Illuminate conference too, just because we'll have a lot of meat in between with our discussion today. And so interesting, I always tune into webinars and articles that talk about the cookieless future and identity resolution, mainly because there's so many different perspectives. And the Kellogg team mentioned it, Rich mentioned it, there's no one size fits all. And I think that's really important. And so Amisha, you being at FinTech and I'm at Influential, an influencer marketing company, the cookieless future impacts all of us to varying degrees. And we hope today, collectively, Amisha and I can unpack a lot of that for you guys today tuning in. So if you guys can all humor me for a second, I'd like to set the context for our discussion today because what we haven't, I noticed the other segments haven't discussed how we got here, right? So to start, there really isn't a single overarching law in the United States that regulates how companies collect, store, and share customer data. There are various industry-specific laws like HIPAA, COPA, maybe ROSCA comes close, the Online Shopper Confidence Act, but nothing that comprehensively holds companies accountable for the customer data they are collecting, storing, and selling. And so begins what I like to call the road to regulation, which before GDPR in 2018, Apple launched ITP, Intelligent Tracking Prevention, in 2017, which limited website tracking capabilities in Safari. Then shortly to follow was the renowned GDPR in the EU. Then, of course, since then, we've had Firefox cookie blocking, CCPA, Apple's ATT, and various state-level regulations following CCPA, including Colorado, Connecticut, Utah, and Virginia. Can you tell GDPR ruined my Memorial Day in 2018? So this is my attempt to at least, make good on this. So all of this to say, Chrome cookies phasing out is on brand for this privacy evolution, and regardless of when it actually takes place, currently slated for 2024. So Amisha, what does a cookieless future look like, and why should businesses be paying attention?
So I think we should also already be paying attention. We know that while Google has pushed it out another 2 years, it's coming. And if you really think about just the way we're set up today, and I didn't realize this either, but in most recent, as we're trying to look at solutions and what we want to do and how should we best be prepared, right? Because we're marketing and we still want to drive revenue for the company. This is, retargeting is going to change. So a lot of the ways we do things now, we'll have to make adaptations so we can be compliant and, with all the privacy laws that you're mentioning, right? Also with cookieless. So when you think about the way the world is right now, already 50% of everyone is on cookieless through their browsers, right? If you look at Safari and others, if you look at apps, mobile apps, like people are already outside of what we call the walled gardens, like Google, right? So that's already 50% of the audience that you're trying to reach is already there, right? So that is something to really think about. There is still a huge lag, right, with people getting there, but I think it's time to start. If you don't start when we get there, it's going to be ripping off a huge Band-Aid for everybody. They have also, as we're thinking about this, right, think about it, cheaper CPAs, and it's more of a dynamic CPM. So that will help reduce your costs right now before everyone is there. So it's a good time to start testing, and it's not going to be as impactful, right? You're not dumping 10%, right? It's really a good time to experiment. The inventory is cheaper, and maybe you'll get, I'm hearing of some case studies, one of the platforms, Quantcast, where some of their more traditional companies are getting more impressions than their traditional campaigns in, cookieless. So
yeah. I think also, I agree. And I think Rich had mentioned it briefly in the last segment, but building and maintaining trust is a huge component to this. And my point of view has always been that brand safety is a two-way street. So oftentimes, and from my perspective as a former media buyer, when we talk about brand safety, we're talking about blocked keyword lists and is my content showing up in a brand safe context. Brand safety also means, can your brand be trusted? Is your brand safe? So how can I, as a consumer brand, if I give you permission to store my data, it won't show up in a breach. It won't get sold without my permission or knowledge. I won't get spammed multiple times a day. So Amisha, you have a mastery of building efficient customer experiences. I'd love your thoughts on how important is it for brands to reassess how they establish and cultivate consumer trust?
It's going to have to be very clear that that people have given you their consent, right? So choice. So checking all the requests that are coming through, that it is meeting, like we all went through GDPR, right? But this is making sure that what they've opted into, and to make sure we're not, what we've promised to do is what we're going to do, and we don't overstep that. Work really closely with your legal team, right? Because then it will be set correctly. And then, in some cases you may, if you don't have one, get a consent management platform, right? Or, and really think about how, even with your own customers, what is the consent with customers? What do you have the consent within the people that are asking, that have come to your site, they've downloaded something, be really clear that they've downloaded it. Now you have their information, so they will be receiving notifications, or they'll be receiving emails, or what have they opted into? Make some choices, because I think it's going to be about choices, and making sure that you are legally meeting all the requirements when you're doing that, and also making sure you may want a consent management platform. But trust is a really key important thing, and it takes so easy to break it, right? You hear about the breaches. So also putting on security protocols so people feel like, yes, this is a secure environment, given my information, and the consent is there.
Yes, absolutely, on choice. And I believe that giving the consumer more control over the who, what, where, when, and how of their data is the future. Consent is going to be something more democratized. And I'm curious, for fintech, a highly regulated industry, what are some best practices you can share around consent management?
So when you think about getting consent, right, you want to give, like I said, choice, but you really need to work with legal. You need to work with your service and operations team, so that you have a framework set up of, if somebody downloads a piece of content, we are going to start offering choices like, would you be interested in a monthly newsletter? Would you like more piece of content like this? Do you want something daily or weekly or monthly? We need to think about those things and create those right touch points, because if we all of a sudden now have someone's information, there's an expectation that they want to understand that how the information is being used, and be really clear. This is, we will be able to communicate with you if that's all you want to do, right? Like marketers want to. This is a communications tool. Make it really clear. Your information will not be shared outside of our company. It is really, truly a way for us to communicate. Be really clear in your consent language, and work with legal. I think it's really important, because people look at that, and then when they get bombarded, they're like, why did this happen? I didn't choose this. Or I didn't understand that I wanted this one thing, or to watch this one webinar, and now you're, emailing me every day. And your SDRs are hounding me. That's not what I signed up for, right? So are you asking for consent to communicate to them? Are you asking for consent so you could share marketing materials, right? Be really clear, or that, yes, it's okay if somebody contacts you. So
Absolutely.
we need to be very clear about that.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think one of the opportunities this change presents is the ability to enhance customer relationships. because now is as great a time as any to be reassessing the various touch points and gateways into your site, mobile app, store, what have you, and evaluate the purpose of each touch point and whether they optimally drive that desired outcome, whether it's time spent, education, leads, purchase. And I think brands who do this well will differentiate themselves from their competition.
Yeah, I think part of the experience that you can offer, right, is think about all the touch points. Do you need that many? Are they the right ones? And I think if you have to become choiceful in how you're creating that experience and what you're communicating now that you have someone's email, I think, because people opt out now very quickly. So right. How do you prevent that from, you're going to have some of that anyways, because it's not the right thing, but how do you make it so it's relevant? So that I think is going to become even more, I know we talk about the mechanics of consent and we talk about the mechanics of legal. That's what you need. And that's going to be just the bar. But then you have to think about, if we do this and we get it, what do we do with it that makes it really great that they want to stay with you? And that I think is going to drive customer experience and touch points even more. And maybe doing less is better versus, bombarding people with a ton of stuff.
Yeah, you answered my next question. I was basically going to ask, what are some ways brands can start enhancing their customer profiles? But I think that is such a great point. And we talked about this yesterday, where going through those touch points to, weed out the ones that are maybe superfluous, or go through, okay, if the KPI of my media is to get somebody to fill out this lead form, what next? What do I do? And have that conversation as a consumer, right? Less about, a brand, and making sure the measurement set up to capture all of that. So on an opt-out, you can consent manage and make sure that you're, not reaching that customer if they've willingly opted out. And so from a general lens or point of view, in your opinion, what steps should brands be taking to prepare for the cookieless future?
I think you need to start testing, right? Either, we use a platform here, through our agency, we use podcasts. There's other tools you can use too, but really figuring out, how do you reach out to people? Because you're not going to be able to retarget in the same way. So there's like hash matching, like there's different ways that we'll be able to really come out and think about how do we reach people in our audience and communicate to them and then get them to come back to us, right? So one is kind of, if you think about it, as more like authenticated targeting, right? So it's not too far away from old party cookies, right? But this is the explicit consent from the actual user, right? So if everybody's wanting to create their own first party data, right? So this is another way of, it's a login screen to a website before you can read or view the content, right? So now you're authenticating, someone's authenticating themselves, they're getting access to your stuff, but it's again a way to get that, and then we'll get a unified ID, right? So Trade Desk does this really well, right? So you get that same ID across a group of websites. That's what this title is, like ID, different approaches, ID resolution, right? And so that is providing a user with a single ID that can be used everywhere. And it kind of matches somebody along, with different IDs, right, within the technology. And then we can use that data and almost create identity graph, right? And so then we can say, hey, we have all these user IDs and they're connected to these data sets. So somebody's like, we used the example yesterday, if somebody has booking a flight to New York, they will get served up, right, the ads and the right things for certain companies for hotels to book, right? So if you think about that, that gets into more of the anonymous targeting, right? That example, right? But the first example is you get it, or you get into this kind of random ID assignment. So you can, without breaking consent, without overtly retargeting, get the same sort of benefit, right? And then anonymous targeting, right, is one of the ways I just mentioned now is, and then you can also, it's contextualized targeting. So if people are searching for certain things, and based on that, right, you can, and then they engage with your ad, right, you can use that technology to scan the page for other contextual elements, right? And then find pages that contain similar features and kind of bring those things up again, knowing that you're going to hit your target audience again, right? So, that's very technical, right? But it's, how do we do these things? But it's like with authenticated and anonymous targeting, I think those are probably what people are thinking now. And with the tool sets that are out there, probably the two main routes for replacing third-party cookies. But I think people really need to start doing that now and then measure and see how you do, right? When you're using these different methods. And remember, half the audience you're trying to target is cookieless already. So I just said a lot of it was technical,
Yes.
but it's something to, if you use those two terms, do the research, you can get really in the weeds, work with your marketing ops and your operations folks and your legal teams to make sure you're set. And then having that, right, you can move forward. But I would now is the time, right? Maybe take 5 to 10% of your budget and do testing, because you are going to reach an audience that's cookieless right now. Test it out on those unwalled gardens and see what happens and compare, so that when the change happens, whenever 2 years, 3 years, you're not just caught without any sort of pathway or benchmark.
Yeah. The flight to New York brings me back to my early days as a media buyer on Caesars Entertainment, where we were contextually targeting back then cohorts that have known, or we're visiting OTAs, online travel agent sites, searching for flights to Vegas, right, and then cross-selling with amenity ads for the pool or the chef's restaurant, whatever it is. But what's old is new again is certainly a component to this. And I did write a couple notes down on the first party data side and around employing a smarter way of capturing and utilizing your data as a brand. And kind of distilled it down into 3 steps. So understanding your customers, like number one, and that step involves your data auditing and enrichment, your identity building, like what you were mentioning, Amisha, and then engaging, right? So how to improve your CX as a result of, this better understanding of your customer, giving them an experience that is meaningful. And as Paul mentioned from Kellogg, it adds value to them. And incentivize, right? So the personalization, the promotions, the loyalty rewards, once you do, we spend so much money getting customers and retargeting them. It behooves brands to be capturing and smartly identifying, their ways to collect first party data and delivering a better experience for their customers. That just will get you more loyal customers. And one quick shameless plug on the first party data piece. We've written a playbook at Influential on how to influence your first party data strategies, leveraging, you guessed it, influencers. So outlining how brands can tap into creators to reach new audiences and enhance existing first party data collection efforts. So anyone that's interested, I'm happy to send or walk through, connect with me on LinkedIn. But I do want to go quickly back to talk a little bit about performance, because there's so much talk about loss in these conversations, like the loss of data signals, visibility, transparency. Should brands be resetting their performance expectations moving forward?
I think we need to think about that. We will have to set new benchmarks, right? So if once we become completely cookieless, there will be other benchmarks to look at and other measurements. And then once we do have someone's consent, you will be able to use, or you'll be able to use your data, right? But in order to build that first piece, you're going to have to do these other programs, whether it's ID, whether it's having a consent management program, and then contextual, right? Sort of outreach, and then coming back, right? So we need to get ready for that. And, things like JavaScript enabled on your homepage and pixels and other things that you're allowed to do, right? And make sure that everything is compliant once you do that. But you have to do the testing to set the benchmark for yourself. And that's time is in the next 2 years, is to set the benchmark. So you have that benchmark and you have the measurement once you do have it, and then you're able to tie all of that together. And we'll have to look at those signals in a different way, right? Once you do the contextual, you're reaching, at least you're reaching the right people at the right time. Either, on B2C side is point of purchase, but on the B2B side, is it the right persona? They're now looking for us, they're looking for accounts payable. Okay, so we know there's certain signals and we act on those, right? And then we get people there, and then where were they on your site? And having those little tags will help you drive a better journey
Yes, we at Influential, we do a lot of incrementality testing, and we always encourage brands to beef up an always on learning agenda throughout the year, because there's always stuff to be testing. And so
Always be testing.
always be testing. The cookieless future is just one of those many tests in your overarching learning agenda for the year, in my opinion, that should be one of those testing hypotheses you want to solve for over time, in addition to many others, depending on, the brand's challenges and needs. And so because majority of our media runs on social channels, the infamous walled gardens, we see a lot of success with incrementality testing. So what is the outcome when influencer media is in market versus out of market, and what is that delta? So we see a lot of success looking at it that way as well. And so I do want to pivot to personalization. That's a big topic, because I do think it's a natural segue from the first party data conversation, which is, and back to my earlier point, I think it behooves brands to deliver personalized experiences to their customers. And it isn't, I don't have to read stats on it. I think common sense dictates that a bad customer experience will turn customers away, right? People want to feel like they're being treated special or incentivized, unlike a one-to-many experience. So Amisha, how can brands achieve personalization?
So, I mean, there's different ways to do this, right? So when somebody comes to your site, they've signed up, they downloaded, now you get their consent. What are you serving them next, right? You want to have it personalized. If you know your persona and you know what industry they're in, and you now have some sort of information, or for us, it's ERP or industry, then we can go back to them and say, oh, you're in the, so we do payments in the creator economy. We work with Influential, right? So it's paying out your influencers, because that's important. Some people are making thousands and tens of thousands. Some people are making dollars, right? So it depends on, how they're getting paid. So when we look at that, we want to work with people who are paying out to customers and networks. How do we help them? So then what happens is they download something around payments. And the next thing that we serve up, oh, we noticed that this person is doing this. Oh, it's in the creator economy space, right? Or shared marketplace, or whatever it is. Okay, then the next thing they get is, oh, are you trying to pay, influencers? Are you trying to pay creators? Is the next asset they get. So then it's personalized based on industry, right? And as you walk them down the line, then when your SDR reaches out, it's like, oh, I understand that you're interested in payments and that you're in this industry and you've read this. What is your payment? So it allows a nice conversation flow and workflow. Some people come in from a webinar. Some people come in from content syndication. Some come in from search. They're, where the source is not where the behavior is. You need to do something else to realize if it's PPC, we know it's high intent. Okay, so that's awesome. But if it's not, what about everything else? There are people who are really interested, and you have to guide them and put behavior guideposts in front of them. When they latch onto one, you're like, okay, if it's step A, now we know it's high intent, someone should call them. Oh, it's step C, it's not as high intent. They're just looking for thought leadership. Let's continue down this path with this sort of content and then try again in the future, right? So then they get put into that path. So you have to really think about what I call the path of personalization, where if A, then they get this. If it's B, then it's this. If it's C, so be really clear as you're creating all your different sorts of drips online and then offline as well.
Yeah, well said. I think brands know what their high value customers look like and how they interact with their brand. And as people are willingly or being prompted to share information directly with you as a brand, it's then the brand's responsibility to deliver those better experiences, exactly how you laid out, Amisha, pending where they come from, the types of pages they're landing on, what they're interacting with, while remaining compliant, and then offering some level of value exchange. So exactly to your point, if I'm low intent, I'm just looking for some thought leadership, don't waste a salesperson's time, giving me a call when they could have made a call that led to a better, a more profitable outcome. So I completely agree with that. And I think that's such an amazing note to take away for those tuning in. Shifting to my next question. So The demise of cookies does not equate to the end of marketing. So what it does mean, however, is rethinking the approach to data capture and governance to ensure your brand is scaling accurately and with consent. The kind of data you're using, how you're collecting it, how it's being distributed, how you keep it secure, so bank account information doesn't get leaked, et cetera. For brands relying on marketing to drive conversions, what are some things brands can do to mitigate retargeting pool loss?
I think that's a great question, right? So when we think about things as loss, we have to also think about what will we gain from this and how do we gain? So as you're testing, what did you gain? What things work better? What things don't work at all? And double down on things that are working and make your investments, right? And then things like ABM and other types of experiences, what you're making offers, like work with other third-party vendors and sites and other places where you're watering holes, where you're personas are, work with influencers. I serve marketing, influencer marketing SAP. So I'm a big proponent of influencer marketing in B2C or B2B, right? So you're extending your audience. So extending your audience, working with third parties, right? Because they may have consent to your audience already and you're getting tapped into that. And then they come to you and then you get their consent too, right? So you already know what they're interested in. And then setting up your own sort of workflow and getting people to come to you, right? And give you consent. Those are some things you can really do to make up for the loss, but you need to play around with your model now and understand what and ask your customers, what are you willing to give up things for? What do you see that you really want, right? You have your own cut, so ask. So then when you're setting these tests up and you're testing, you can be more, either personalized or more direct or really speak to your audience. Because if something speaks to somebody, they're thinking they're going to get a value, you're going to get consent. So you may not get lost. You may get less, but you actually may get higher quality.
Higher lifetime
about
value.
It that way. But if you provide junk, you're going to get junk back.
Yeah, I completely agree. This is why I love your perspective on this, because media paired with the consumer experience, the site side, is what is the ultimate marriage, right? And I think, and the Kellogg team mentioned it earlier, third-party data can be very helpful as a complement, because so often with the retargeting conversation, third-party data gets brought up. It can be very helpful as a complement to your first-party data, but there shouldn't be only one type of data being relied on for long-term strategies. So what Rick had mentioned before, the inevitable conclusion, right? Just making sure you're prepared now. And that's why it's important to diversify data strategies. And a quick way to do that, or not a quick way, but a thorough way to do that, is to perform audits on existing data partners. So if the teams listening in haven't already, to understand how your data is collected, is it deterministic, probabilistic? What is the main identifier that third-party data provider uses to establish matches? I won't give everything away, because another shameless plug, we have a very robust auditing rubric we use at Influential that fuels a more comprehensive matrix of partners. And it's important for us to have that, because we service clients across all verticals, and we've always had to keep an agnostic thinking cap on to ensure that, as head of innovation, we are delivering best-in-class innovative solutions for our clients, and that includes our data partners. So, Amisha, it's not just about Chrome third-party cookies. Safari, Firefox, ATT all contribute to a blurred perception of online behavior. What are some reasons holding clients back from adopting new tactics?
I think people are like, oh, we have more time. We know what works. We need, and right now, so budgets are tight right now, right? Let's be frank. We're going through a time of transition in a lot of businesses. We're being asked, everyone's being asked all around, we certainly work, and we hear from finance leaders that they're being asked now to think about budgets. What's the holdback? What is crucial to the business? So that's the time we're going through right now. And so in these times, the budgets are tight, people are less wary to try new things, right? And then say, oh, I'm trying something. If it doesn't work, I'm not going to get anything back. And there's no pressure for me to really do anything about it, right? So you can wait a little bit longer, but start thinking about a strategy, start talking to people and start doing a test right now, because it is tight. There is already 50% of your customers, especially in Safari, it's like mostly cookieless. Do some tests now, take a small portion of your budget, do a test. You may get better results, right? Like some of the companies I've been talking to, they're actually getting better, more impressions somewhere else, and it's cheaper, right? So this is a good time to do that, especially if something's cheaper, and you may end up with the same results. Just choose, if you don't have the expertise in-house, choose a good partner. like yourself, Quantcast, there's so many, right? Like choose somebody to partner with that can show you the way, that's an expert for you and your team. And then you can start testing. And like I said, it is cheaper right now. Those CPMs are cheaper. So, you know, that's an okay test and experiment to do. But I think people who aren't thinking about it, and people who don't start testing in 2023, by the time we get there, you're going to be behind everybody because you don't know what your benchmarks are. You don't know what will work and won't work for you. So I think it'll get more scary. And then if you have to rip it off and, you know, 6 months up to something or a year, everyone's like, oh my gosh, it's here. Then everybody's going to be doing it. Then cost is going to go up. And so you're going to be doing your testing in a more expensive environment. So just think about it that way. Right. And, you know, I think people should really think about, you know, how do you prove anything out? Right. We're not going to say to a business like, oh, well, let's do these things without having a little bit of proof and some piloting, right? So you can even position as we need to pilot something next year because there is going to be a shift away from this at some point, and you don't want to just be left hanging, right? So there's no silver bullet right now. So we're all going to have to figure it out together and see what final approach is going to really work for you and your company, your persona, and your business.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I think that tried and true tactics are hard to pivot away from, which is why I think I agree. It is business critical to be testing now to inform future tactical and benchmarking strategies. On accounts where we test and learn a lot, the question is, if the tried and true tactics weren't available, then what? Right. Then, you know, and start to prioritize. And like you mentioned before, Misha, cheaper inventory will naturally leads to cheaper cost per. So if you're operating on a cost per KPI, cheaper inventory is the way to go. So,
make it a channel and test it out against everything else, right? And see what is really working for you, right? And so, and if it's not, then you can try some other things and work with other partners, right? Because then you're not left hanging.
Yeah, exactly. And so last question for me. In order to thrive in this ever-changing privacy landscape, what should marketers be doing today to navigate? I think we've covered this, but we'll keep going.
Testing. So everyone has like CRO, like, oh, this button or like this option on my website or landing page, this message testing, right? Just make it a part of, okay, cookieless, you know, targeting, you know, and testing is going to be one of the tenets. You have CRO, you have message testing, and now you have this. And it's just another piece that you add to your strategy for 2023. And then you have that, right? So as you're checking out this button or that button, try out, you know, a small 5 to 10% of your budget test on this, right? And lay it out and then say, okay, I'm going to do it for this amount of time. These are the learnings we had. We'll put a stop. Now we know what we're going to do. And here is a bigger plan. Or, hey, we're getting a lot of good results. We're going to shift a little bit more budget here because we're actually getting more from this versus maybe some of the other places that aren't working as well, that are tried and true. We're getting more, right? And you start getting that balance. So when you start getting that balance, eventually when the shift happens, you'll start going like, you know, like this or like this, whatever, whatever, fancy diagrams. But, you know, as one goes down, one goes up, right? Like, so by the time you get there, you'll have a mix. And so when it just goes all the way, you'll know where the potholes are for yourself, right? And your company.
Yeah, exactly. I tried to distill it down into 3 takeaway themes for our viewers. So here's the best I can do. So number 1 is consent. Consent builds trust and better experiences, and trust is the foundation for all relationships, right? Trust and communication. So we've established that. So that's number 1. Number 2, technology audit. And so how and where are you collecting data? What data are you collecting? What's most important to your business, and building a consistent identity, right? Are you asking for like PII that you don't necessarily, that doesn't help you do anything, or, you know, making sure that you're being cognizant of somebody willingly handing over their information. And then how are you storing it, distributing it? What does it mean for measurement? And the Kellogg team touched on it a little bit with CDPs, but all of these things need to factor into technology and roadmap decisions. And while you're at it, measurement framework and learning agenda discussions, because the third is test and learn. So you're going to want to find holes. You mentioned potholes. I love that, in your process now versus later, as well as understand how different audiences react to privacy experiences. Because Some people may be more willing than others to disclose personal information, and some may need added incentive or be entirely turned off by the process and go elsewhere to competition who isn't asking, or who is asking in a more favorable way to them. And so in thesis, I guess, strong customer intelligence will allow for better prediction of your consumer behavior, which then fuels continually your CX, and then will ultimately help deliver ROI. And so there's a lot more layers to it, but that's the best summary I can provide in a 40-minute window.
This is a really rich topic. We have tons of people talking about, but think of it, it comes down to think about the customer experiences you have and where you've given up your information willingly, and it's a joy, and you're like, oh, it's not a big deal because I'm getting all these things, it's making my life better. So for us, we want to make our, the people that we serve, their lives better, and they brought us in and they're trusting us, right? So how do we make their lives better? So when you do that and you're trying to engage and create a relationship with somebody, it's the same thing. If they have a good experience, they're willing to not only get more information from you and be more open and getting further engagement, they will become your customer, right? I always say a customer starts from the minute they come to your website. That's when they're your customer.
Yeah, I completely agree. And then there's times as a consumer that I've unsubscribed from email lists because I'm either not sure how I've gotten on it in the first place, or it's just no longer relevant because as Lou from the Kellogg team mentioned earlier, consumer expectations change too. So, I might have given my information to a brand at a particular time because I was looking for something, but no longer, need it because purchase cycles are always different for brand. I think that's why everyone in today keeps saying there's no one size fits all, because there's every brand is so nuanced. I mean, you pick a item and things are different between brands, but even something as like a purchase cycle. And I get emails still from brands that I've unsubscribed. I thought I've unsubscribed from there.
It's really hard to opt out. And you're just like, oh my gosh, why can't I get out? You don't want that to be the experience, because then someone's going to really walk away and be like, no, never, ever, ever will I ever, work with or want anything from this brand ever again.
Exactly. And now that privacy regulations are becoming more and more prevalent, either, at the state level, ultimately maybe a national level, brands could face, and Rich had mentioned this earlier, face some challenges with regulators if if they're not managing for opt-outs, or they're not managing for specific state level at this time now preferences. So there's a lot to manage. There's a lot to keep in mind. I think following the whole consent, tech audit, and test and learn strategy will help brands kind of at least give them a little head start for brands that are like, where do I start? I don't know.
Bring in your legal team. Don't forget, bring in your legal. Start doing these things to make sure you're going to be using the right requirements, even in your testing. Say, hey, when this happens, what legally should we be doing, so that you are also testing out your consent messages and the like. Right. So
absolutely. Yeah. Legal is so important, and having the appropriate disclaimers, terms and conditions, and mapping that towards state level laws. Yes. Very, very important. Well, Amisha, this was such a blast. Thank you so much for joining me.
The conversation.
I have a quick outro for us. So for those tuning in, or those that are still with us, rather, if you missed any of today, it will be posted on Brand Innovators YouTube. Amisha and I can post the link on LinkedIn to view on demand once that's available in the coming days. And then just a reminder to register for, actually, Amisha, I didn't tell you I was doing this part. So a reminder to register for Tipalti's Illuminate conference, September 13th through 15th, if you're interested. The conference is dedicated to accelerating your finance future and will include can't miss keynotes, thought-provoking industry roundtables, as well as breakout sessions. It's great for networking, learning, and taking some great ideas back to your financial operations counterparts.
If you're in the Bay Area on September 15th, we'll have celebrity Billy Bean. He's the guy, the inspiration behind the movie Moneyball, on site. So if you're interested, reach out to me and we can get you and your finance team invited. Awesome. And I also did a quick note for more information. Visit tipalti.com/illuminate. As a call to action, the media buyer in May needs a call to action. And so thank you to everyone for tuning in. Thank you to Brand Innovators for hosting us, and a very special thank you to Amisha for your valuable input today. Thank you so much, Kristen, and thank you to Influential, and then thank you, Brand Innovators, and hope you have the rest of a great of your day.